think it's questionable when government tells the industry as a collective, you must diversify. If individual businesses want to make the most of their assets, that's up to them, that's fine. But on an industry scale, the government doesn't tell steelmakers to go and open a chain of hotels to cross-subsidise their steelmaking operations. So it's never clear to me why farming is expected to do other things.
As the government appoints former NFU President Minette Batters to lead a review of farming profitability, we examine what she should be looking at and whether the government really should be telling farmers to diversify. We get out in the field where resistant wheat crops are showing signs of yellow rust. We look at the prospects for farmers to supply more local food, and we go on the hunt for a giant red fiberglass cow. This is the Farmers Weekly podcast. I'm Johann.
I'm Louise Impey.
And I'm Hugh Broom.
All that and more coming up, but first, former NFU President Minette Batters is going to lead a government review of farming profitability. Her appointment by Defra Secretary Steve Reed aims to help growers and livestock producers increase their profit and boost their financial resilience. Well, Minette has agreed to join us on a future episode of the Farmers Weekly podcast, but first we got together three experts and asked them what her review should look at if it really is to solve farming's profitability problem. Emily Norton from Farm Foresight, Richard King from Anderson's Farm Business Consultants, and John T. Armitage from Stratton Parker. Emily Norton, we'll start with you. Minette Batters has a huge task ahead of her with this review, and she's acknowledged herself already that there's no silver bullet when it comes to solving farming's profitability problem.
No, there really isn't. It's an incredibly complex picture of how farms operate, how they exist in supply chains, where they might get paid for doing anything. But fundamentally, what we've had over the last under the Common Agricultural Policy and thereafter is a system where farmers are heavily supported, but not really to be profitable. So, all of the tax reliefs work so that we can write off profits into investing within machinery. So, where we're trying to get to this idea of what profitability means for farming, that in itself is vague. And so trying to identify measures and policy measures that might kind of help to influence within those spaces is an incredibly difficult question.
Richard King from Anderson's Farm Business Consultants. Farmers are always being told to embrace innovation, improve productivity, increase market access and use risk management tools. Just some of the terms of reference in this review. If only it was that easy, though.
Yes, it's sort of very easy to sit in an office and pontificate on these things. But yeah, I mean, they're running complicated business in an ever-changing environment. Some of those things, innovation, it will work on one farm, it won't be practical on another. So all of this is sort of kind of choosing what works in a specific situation. And the trouble is that UK farming is a collection of thousands of small businesses. If it's three or four, then you could sort of see what the problem was with each one and move forward. But of course, that means there's sort of thousands of different answers almost.
John T. Armitage from Stratton Parker. The terms of reference here are somewhat unusual.
I thought the terms of reference for this review were interestingly worded. They appear to be partly about, as Emily says, partly about advice to farming businesses about what they are able to do, and partly about advice to government about what they can do to support it. So it sort of feels a bit to me like not simply a question of what would you farmers like from government. It's more like what's wrong with farming and how collectively can we improve or repair it. And that seemed like a sensible sort of question to me, but a really difficult answer.
Farming, as we know, John T, is a long-term game, and it can't just turn on a sixpence and head off in a different direction. What sort of advice do you think this review is going to come up with?
One of the key questions that I think needs to be addressed early on is, what does profitable mean? By that, what I mean is we get so used to looking at this in a binary way and talking about farmers either being profitable or not profitable. But we need to be thinking about whether it's profitable enough. And by that, I mean, allowing for a decent standard of living for people and investment not only in replacement for things, but also for improvements and growth, and not least a reasonable return for the risks that are being taken. So it's all about sort of investor confidence. And I'm sure that's something that Minette's going to be looking at.
Defra Secretary Steve Reed's given us 6 months to complete this review. Not very long in itself, and it's clear with the best will in the world that we are not going to solve farming's profitability problem in 10 minutes here on the Farmers Weekly podcast. But Emily Norton, what do you hope that this review achieves?
One of the things I would most like it to do is to encourage food production to stand on its own 2 feet. I've been a bit worried recently by some of the stuff that I've heard, for example, Steve Reed say that, farmers can just diversify and that will make it okay. But as we know, a lot of the tenanted sector is prevented from diversifying by the terms of their tenancy agreements. And so, those core farming businesses, sort of separate from the land, need to be the ones who kind of, that core function needs to be looked at separately to any kind of, more complex asset management strategy that, your farmer owner might be able to consider in terms of diversification opportunities. And again, I hope that is something that Minette's able to report back into government, is that there are very different sort of sets of opportunities out there for people. But the expectation that farmers work harder from diversification to support food production, I think that's something I would really like to be broken. Food production needs to be a thing, and it needs to be profitable, and it needs to be risk adjusted in its own right.
Richard King from Anderson's, what Emily's just said will strike a chord with many of our listeners, many farmers. From the government's point of view, the answer to many of farming's problems, too often, to me anyway, seems to be to diversify, i.e. if you can't make a profit out of food production, go and do something else other than farming. It's bonkers, isn't it?
Yes, I always get slightly... I think it's questionable, this sort of, when government tells the industry as a sort of collective, you must diversify. If individual businesses want to make the most of their assets, that's up to them, that's fine. But on an industry scale, the government doesn't tell steelmakers to go and open a chain of hotels to cross-subsidise their steelmaking operations. So it's never clear to me why farming is expected to do other things to cross-subsidise its farming operations. It ought to be focusing on, as you say, what it does well. And we've seen circumstances where businesses have got distracted by their diversifications, and actually it's meant that their farming operation is less good than it might have been.
And Defra encouraging farmers to diversify, to do things other than food production, is just one reason why many farmers, many growers, many livestock producers, Emily Norton, feel that the government just isn't taking food production and food security seriously enough.
No, it doesn't. And I suppose this again might be something that Minette wishes to kind of focus on. Like, one of my bugbears is that in the 1947 Agriculture Act, we had this statement at the beginning of it that, was concerned about the economic conditions of farming. And in the 2020 Agriculture Act, we didn't have that. We literally just had, this act is a means of distributing money in all of these different ways. It didn't say why. And I think the why bit, that purpose statement for farming, is the real missing ingredient around all of this. So, without that kind of aligning purpose, what we're all doing this for, we can't make then the sort of all of the other extra decisions that need to come to say, does this meet that objective for farming in this country or not? And I think at the moment there is this sort of slightly hands-off, well, it's up to farmers to make sense of all of this stuff, that we risk so much. But equally, it's not necessarily up to government to do that. It can be up to the industry itself to say, this is what we want our purpose to be. We want to be food producers, and kind of, almost in like a self-defined industrial strategy go back to government to say, these are the tools that we need in order to be a successful industry going forward. And I would love to kind of, again, see some of that, not just asking government to fix our problems, but really kind of like sort of working out for the industry where we're going to align our future behind.
This is, of course, a Defra review, John T. Armitage, and yet so much government policy that affects farming, be it trade, be it inheritance tax, for example, comes from departments other than Defra. This review needs to be much broader than just a Defra review, John T.
Yes, I think Defra as a department, is mostly engaged in regulatory functions, and environmental scheme development has been for a long time. It's good news that they're developing a focus on profitability through their new profitability unit. But you're absolutely right that for business improvements, we need to look wider across government. I see it is in the terms of reference that Minette needs to look across government to see, or across departments to see what may be required elsewhere. And we have the obvious examples of taxation, planning and development, particularly, and so on, in order to free up some of the other issues that would be required for business. So, yeah, I think it is a really important aspect. Sort of moving on from that, I think Defra themselves need to decide what some of their policies are for. And I think that is an issue that Minette will need to cover, obviously. There's talk, for instance, about the replacement for the SFI being directed where it is needed most. Now, I'm wondering if this means partly at businesses with low profitability or small businesses, in which case is it an environmental policy or an income support policy, for instance. So it's difficult to make it both. So I think out of this advice to government, I think there needs to be very clear objectives for policy. And I think we on the receiving end of government agricultural policies sort of mix up schemes with policy, whereas schemes are the delivery of policy rather than policy itself. I think we need to look at a higher level, and let's hope we get rid of the shifting sands of policy development and we end up with something a bit stable for a while.
So clearly then, this review will be looking across the industry, across the supply chain, across government. And then when it comes to farms themselves, Richard King, no one size fits all. We're back to that whole no silver bullet kind of thing that Minette mentioned right at the beginning.
That's right. I mean, everybody, if you go meet a farmer, they'll say, well, yeah, my farm is, unusual, specific. It's not like anybody else's. And to an extent, that is true. And there will be, all the changes will have to be bespoke. Although, some sort of themes will probably come through. Effectively, it's the quality of the management that really sets the good businesses apart from the also-rans. It's actually not what size you are, it's not what sector you're in, it's not what part of the country or even what soil type you've got. It's the quality of the person running the business tends to be the key factor.
You talk about management, Richard. Are there any particular areas that we can squeeze just a little bit more profit out of, or any profit at all?
I mean, it's... We did a bit of work with the HDB a few years ago, and sort of, what are the characteristics of the best performing farms? None of this would be sort of hugely surprising, but it's minimising cost. It's sort of slightly dull and unglamorous, but if you spend less, you are likely to make more because you're pretty much selling commodities, and the market will decide what you get for that. Those that compile budgets, those that benchmark, they just know how they're doing, and they can make changes, and they can see which areas aren't working. Those that understand their markets, have got attention to detail, have a mindset for change. Don't just keep on doing the same things over and over again and expecting different results. So, there are features of sort of good performing businesses that sort of, can be replicated, can be coached, can be sort of taken on board by others.
Richard King from Anderson's, Emily Norton from Farm Foresight, and John T. Armitage from Stratton Parker. Thank you very much for joining us here on the Farmers Weekly podcast. We'll pick the bones out of that in just a minute, but first, a short message from one of our sponsors.
The Farmers Weekly podcast. The Farmers Weekly podcast.
So no easy answers to farming's profitability problem. Minette Batters, Baroness Batters, undertaking that 6-month review on behalf of Defra. Louise, Hugh, no easy answers. I mean, we knew there weren't going to be any, didn't we?
Yeah, I mean, everybody was agreed on that one, weren't they? It is a big problem, and Minette has got a very big task in front of her. You know, there's an awful lot that we could talk about around this, but certain sectors in farming really aren't making any money at all at the moment. Others are having a slightly better time. So, yeah, everybody in agreement, really. Big job on, and let's hope she can come up with some really useful, workable information.
A tough job then for Minette Batters, and there's a lot riding on this, isn't there, Hugh? Not only for the industry, but also in a personal capacity for Defra Secretary Steve Reed, who has said repeatedly that if farming isn't profitable by the time he leaves office, whenever that might be, that he will consider himself as having failed in his job.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big ask, isn't it? And as we said, it's a huge challenge, this. There's several things here. She's only got 6 months to do this, and it's just been announced. Firstly, I'm amazed. I think in some ways it shows. I don't have a problem with the study. I think it's a good idea, and it'll be interesting to see what she finds out. Although I think the outcomes will be, without sounding too cynical, be fairly predictable. But equally, it's slightly naive of Defra saying, oh, yes, let's drape out a former NFU president, and that'll pacify the farmers who really hate our government and hate us at the moment. That strikes me as a bit naive. And I actually bumped into Minette the week before this was announced when I was in London, and she told me that she was doing this work. And I said, that's great, brilliant. And I just thought it would be something to just be done quietly, getting on with it, get out there, do a load of gathering and then come back. And then, of course, the week later, it's all trumpeted out there. So we shall see. But it is a huge challenge. And in some cases, it's, spot the obvious stupid. And in other cases, it's, there are things you could do as a government tweaking, but actually the numbers are, it's quite tight. And I go back and use this analogy around, if we look at the IHT scenario. So part of the deal of talking about profitability is to say, these farms are running on full bore and they're making loads of money, therefore you can afford to pay all this tax. Now that presumably is one of the thought trains in the Labour policy machine's head at the moment. Equally, it does need to be teased out. Where are the bad bits and the good bits that can be worked out? And also, don't forget, you've got other things going on as well, like the land use directive, trying to work out there. And we've got to be careful that this doesn't become some sort of seeding exercise to say, well, yeah, we've done a profitability survey and we've come to the conclusion there's nothing you can do for the uplands. We've got to do everything in East Anglia, and the rest of you can all be turned into tree parks or solar farms. So there's quite a lot of nuance around this piece of work.
A nuance too around who Minette Batters is actually working for. It was reported in the Times that Labour has hired Baroness Batters as it tries to woo farmers hit by inheritance tax to boost farm profits. But that's not exactly right, Louise. It's more a case of her being employed to lead the profitability review, not being in Labour's pocket.
Oh, yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think she is heading up this review. It's as we've said, it's a much needed review. I don't think she's in the Labour Party's pocket at all when it comes to what she's going to discover and what recommendations are going to be made. So, yeah, I can't really see that the way that it was communicated to us all had that spin on it, didn't it, which we saw in other things that they've announced recently. So, Minette is obviously a very good candidate for this job. Loads of experience, plenty of knowledge, fully au fait with what the challenges are at the moment and actually how much worse they have become since the budget. So she's going to do an independent review. And I think that's what's needed, really.
And certainly not afraid to speak truth to power either. Plenty of experience in doing that. The other thing that struck me, as we heard in the audio, is this idea that, we can all make farm businesses profitable simply by not producing any food and doing something else, such as turning your land over to solar panels for 25 years and simply taking the rental income. But that does nothing for food security and feeding the nation, Hugh.
No, it doesn't. And the government keeps talking about the resilience, the food security stuff. And actually, the talk coming out of government around food security and how it should be national security and all that, it's stuff we only ever dreamed of under the previous administration. They started to get the message just before the election. But for many years, all through the whole Brexit negotiation and everything else, they completely went over their head. It was all about, park keeping and BNG. But yeah, it is a big ask. It's a big piece of work, this. But I think ultimately, though, it comes down to it's quite restricted in terms of what you can do, because even if you optimize the supply chain, and let's take your standard family farm, the bulk of the people that are farming in this country are farming units that are family owned. They're probably sub 1,000 acres, probably sub 500 acres. And whilst there are bigger operators out there, there are many, many of these smaller farm businesses, which, tie lots of this whole farming infrastructure together. And if you actually look at it from the point of view, I don't know, you take the average, it's back to the inheritance tax thing, actually. I was thinking about this. You take the average family farm worth, say, 3.5, 4 million quid. In fact, they're probably going to end up, if someone dies in the next couple of years, they're going to end up with an IHT bill of, say, 500,000 quid. Now, split down the line, they do your 10-year interest-free payback, handy payment terms from the Inland Revenue. Thanks, guys. 50 grand a year. So they've got to generate an extra 50 grand a year to pay back that tax bill when it happens, assuming policy goes ahead as is now. Now, that is a starting point for me. It's a pretty major starting point for me, because how do you do that? And how did you then balance, if you said, food production versus diversification? Because the easiest thing to do, if they're in the right part of the country, they rent the sheds out, fill them with caravans, fill the place with solar panels, they'll easily make more than 50 grand a year. But if they want to carry on producing food and do all the environmental stuff and balance all this stuff off, it's not that easy. And it's hugely challenging. So there are certainly things that can be done. There are tweaks around planning permission that the government always talks about. There are around red tape and all these little things. There are things that supply chains can do to be more integrated and more better, more smoother running, more integrated, more efficient. But will they deliver that level of increase of profitability that is required to lift agriculture from an average return on capital of sub 0.5% to needs to be up there at 20 to 30%? And I'm really doubtful of that, unless you massively raise the price of food.
And you mentioned inheritance tax, Hugh. I mean, Louise, what do you think? The government says that it is not going to back down on inheritance tax, and yet at the same time it wants farms to be profitable. Well, how can you expect a farm to be profitable when it's making 0.5% return on capital employed and having to set aside tens of thousands of pounds each year with the prospect of having to pay inheritance tax? One way of helping farms become profitable is to simply back down on inheritance tax. Do you think this could be the start of the off-ramp the government needs to back down a little bit on inheritance tax without it appearing to be a U-turn?
Yeah, well, that would be a very positive outcome from this review, wouldn't it? If it prompted the government to rethink the inheritance tax decision and, at least tweak it anyway to make it work for the majority of farms rather than not work for the majority of farms. It is interesting, isn't it? Farming and profitability, because there has been a lot of effort going into farm businesses at the moment about, so you must calculate your costs and compare your figures, look at the options for reducing your costs. And I actually think that those messages have been heard for really quite some time now. And I'm equally convinced that a lot of farms will have taken those messages on board and done everything that they can possibly do to improve the situation. I mean, we all know doing nothing is not an option, is it? And on most farms, not all, but on most farms, their biggest costs are labour and machinery. So I'm sure they've all taken a very good look at that. You know, we know about the levels of investment that are required to run a farm today, and we also know about the amount of risk that the farms are having to take on. So, if it can persuade the government that they do need to rethink some of their policy, then that would be great. But of course, it's also a much bigger challenge than just that.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast. The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
You're listening to the Farmers Weekly Podcast. Welcome along wherever you're listening to us from. You can email us, podcast@fwi.co.uk. And if you're in the UK itself, you can also message us by texting the word farm followed by your message to 88440. Some news from the Met Office. A record-breaking March for sunshine. April looking set to follow in the theme of meteorological spring so far. Dry, warm and sunny, Hugh.
Yeah, it's been dry, hasn't it? Crikey, as it ever. But look, everyone's raced ahead and they've probably all gone on holiday now because they've got all their spring drilling done. And they're now praying for a bit of rain, which I think, dare I say it, the rain might start. Some rain may appear this weekend. And of course, there's also this hilarious snow bomb story going around. I hope this isn't my Michael Fish moment, but there's this hilarious snow bomb story going around saying that we're going to be hit by Arctic winds and snowstorms next week, which is typical Daily Express stuff. But when you read the credible meteorologists, we're going to in for an unsettled period of weather, which will be welcome to those that have drilled stuff, wanting to bulk up their silage. But then we're just thinking, let's hope it stops by the second week of May so we can then get on and do the silage and get the maize in, etc., etc. But it has been super dry, although still a lot of moisture deep down, though. It's pretty soft in some places, I can tell you that driving around.
Yeah, very low rainfall, but moisture a little bit further down into the soil, Louise.
Yeah, very low rainfall, but, you know, as Hugh said, there is moisture at depth, isn't there? Or there certainly is in most places. And haven't we all been enjoying the sunshine? Just absolutely fabulous. Still very cold at night, or certainly has been very cold at night here where I live in Bedfordshire. So that's just been holding crops back a bit, I would say. But we've had the overnight dews as well. So there is enough moisture, I think, at the moment. I totally get that a lot of people are saying we need a bit more now to get some of this nitrogen down and get the crops to take that up. And I understand that. But so different to the last two springs that we've had, and people have been able to get their field work done. And that's been a big relief.
Yeah, the cold nights really getting cold with us. I mean, we've had frosts on the car, and we're in a bit of a frost hollow where we are either. And it's just holding everything back, isn't it, Louise? It's like all the trees are sort of on pause at the moment. They're trying to get their leaves out. The hedges are coming out now. Most of the hawthorn's out. It's just trying to get out, but it's just thinking, oh, I'm not okay. But we get those nighttime temperatures should start to lift when we get into this unsettled spell. It will just kick everything on, and hopefully, boom, it'll all explode in about 2 weeks. And the arable farmers will need to get out and spray some fungicide around the place, and the grass farmers will be praying for it to stop raining so they can get the silage off.
The other thing that caught my eye this week, a message on Facebook from Southwest West Country auctioneers Greenslade Taylor Hunt. One of their this is one of these giant, sort of, I guess they're fiberglass or something like that. One of these giant cows that has gone missing. A big red cow somewhere in the South Hams, last seen in Ivybridge, and a Facebook appeal to find this red cow. Hugh, I'm not sure whether this is true or not. April Fool's, a few days after April Fool's. I thought that had long gone. True or something that's just a marketing ploy?
Well, look, it's a beautiful cow. It's in the GTH red with the white letters on it. It's a very nice cow. I can see why someone might have been tempted to lift it from outside the Ivybridge office. I think if you read down the item, Johann, it has actually been found on a nearby farm at the top of a hill. Now, whether that was a wacky after the pub prank that took the cow on its travels, needless to say, what a fantastic publicity opportunity the cow has afforded GTH. So well done, guys. We'll look forward to the next rare animal painted in your colour, or not rare animal, but novelty animal painted in GTH colours.
That's the red and much sought after GTA cow. Hugh, how sought after are the rest of the agricultural commodities this week?
Thank you, Johann. The finished deadweight this week goes up again. Crikey, it's gone up 9p this week. It's like bonkers Thursday markets, isn't it? Finished deadweight 690.3. The finished deadweight R4L, which is the other quoted weekly price, but we use the all deadweight, all average. The R4L has this week for the first time broken through the £7 a kilo mark. There you go, £7 and or 700.2p is this week's official R4L. So that's a bit of a historical moment for you. But the steer deadweight average for all steers, all grades, is 690.3, up 9p exactly from last week. The live weight actually drops back a little bit of just under a penny, 390.5 for the live weight at the moment. To the sheep rings, lamb price this week, the SQQ dead weight on lambs is slightly back by about 3p, 724.3, back from 727 last week. The live weight SQQ for sheep, 334.9. That is up literally half a p on the week. Not much movement there. Pig price virtually unchanged, 0.2 of a penny difference this week. The SPP this week for the pigs, 204.8. Little bit of cheer back to the arable rings, whether this is to do with all the crazy cross-Atlantic shenanigans, who knows, but there's a tiny bit of money back in the job. Not much, don't get too excited. Feed wheat lifts about £6, 170.9 this week, up from 164 last week, 0.9. Milling wheat goes up about £5-6, 187.20. Feed barley's even come up £2, £155.80. Oilseed rape comes up £8, £440 dead this week. Spot price for oilseed rape. You feel slightly better about yourself. A year ago, that was £355.40. So it's actually better than last year, which is a rare thing, isn't it? Field peas, 216.7, stand on for the week. Feed beans stand on for the week, 217.10. And the diesel price, as you'd expect, with oil prices tumbling across the globe at the moment, the red diesel price drops to 66.65 pence per litre. That is almost back 2p on the week.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast. The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
Now, farmers and agronomists are being urged to monitor wheat crops more closely this spring after signs of yellow rust on varieties supposed to be resistant to the disease. Observations in recommended list trials in the north of England have found signs of yellow rust on almost all varieties classed as resistant at the young plant stage. There are also the first hints of something unusual starting to happen in other recommended list trial regions. The AHDB recommended list is managed by Mark Bollemacher.
Something is definitely going on. Of all the varieties that are currently on the RL as having seedling resistance, so an R on the list, the only variety where I couldn't find yellow rust was KWS Ultimatum. So there could be, I mean, we'll confirm this, we've sent samples off for testing, but in all other varieties I could find pustules, and that includes obviously some quite popular varieties like Dorsum, Champion, maybe Beowulf, Typhoon. They're all rated as 9 and with seedling resistance, but I'm here at front of a plot of Champion and it's not hard to find.
That's Mark Bollemacher from the AHDB. Louise, clearly very much an emerging situation. Those samples off for testing, and we'll know more soon.
Well, the main thing to say about this, I think, at this stage is that it's just a suggested race change. We don't have the evidence yet to say that that it really has changed in the field. And of course, forewarned is forearmed. So anybody who is at all concerned can go out and have a look at their wheat crops and just see if they can find any disease. And that's the whole reason, I think, for AHDB issuing this warning. They are to say, we suspect something is going on out there. We can't be absolutely sure at this stage, but make sure that you have had a look at your fields and you know if there's any unusual signs of yellow rust. So by that I mean on varieties, wheat varieties that have high resistance ratings. So these are the ones that really shouldn't be getting the disease at all.
Now, we got hold of plant breeder KWS, which is behind KWS Dorset, and asked them about the situation. They sent us a statement saying, we're aware of reports of a potential new strain of yellow rust seen in multiple wheat varieties from a range of breeders in AHDB trials in the north. It will take some time to see how this rust develops and its effect on different varieties. Like AHDB, we'll be monitoring the situation in trials to get a clearer picture. Growers and agronomists should remain vigilant and check all wheat crops as the season progresses. Statement there from plant breeder KWS. Louise, these are some of the UK's most popular wheat varieties. In fact, as much as 30% of the UK wheat area could be potentially involved.
Yeah, from what we know to date, there are, as you say, Johann, some very popular varieties seem to be affected. And these are some of the group 4, the hard feed wheats, the likes of Dawson, Champion and Beowulf. I believe Typhoon is also, they found quite a bit of yellow rust on that, which they weren't expecting to. And then, of course, there are a couple of the group 2 varieties. I think they've mentioned both Mayflower and Palladium as ones, again, that have got yellow rust on at the young plant stage, and really they're supposed to be resistant at this stage. So it is a concern. As you say, potentially it could be a large wheat area, because those varieties are popular. At least 30% of the wheat grown in this country is down to those varieties. So yeah, it's watch this space and make sure you're vigilant and keep on top of things.
Hugh, as a beef farmer, I know you don't grow much wheat, but when it comes to things like disease, whether it's livestock or arable, monitoring and reporting is so important, isn't it?
Yeah, this is a perfect example of it, isn't it? Whether you're in animals, into plants, into whatever, monitoring and reporting, and more importantly, having the expertise. Ironic that we were talking with Graham from HDB last week, having the expertise and the framework and the mechanisms to actually provide that backup. When I hear this, I know nothing about rusts. I'm a simple beef farmer. I grow maize. That's the closest I get to arable. But seeing this and you look at it and you think, my God, this is really bad. And I actually looked up rusts, and I know there are lots of different types of rusts globally, but I did a quick Google because I'm always prepared. And actually, it's really interesting. I found it fascinating anyway. There is a huge chunk of crop loss globally. About 5% of all wheat is lost globally because of rusts. Now, they're all different types of rusts. You just think, this is a thing ticking away in the background. By God, you need the monitoring, you need the feedback, and I'm assuming, Louise, you need a whole load of grower interaction to monitor this and see what's actually happening in the field going forward.
Yes, you do. I mean, yellow rust is a very diverse and dynamic pathogen, and we know that. We've seen these race changes before, and they will continue to happen. I think one of the important things here is that we have these two different types of resistance to yellow rust. We have young plant resistance, and then we have adult plant resistance. So one of the points that has been made about these early sightings of yellow rust is that it may yet disappear. We may find that the adult plant resistance kicks in, and that's usually at around about the T2 timing, and it disappears. But they are absolutely right to highlight this problem at this stage of the season, because the last thing you want to be doing is chasing yellow rust all season, because it can, in the right conditions, cycle very, very rapidly. So they're right to highlight it now. There's an opportunity to get these varieties covered with the T0 spray ahead of the T1 spray, just in case the weather doesn't play ball as the season progresses. And you know what? The fungicides are still very effective on yellow rust for about £4 to £5 a hectare. You can put some tebuconazole on, make sure you get the dose and the coverage right, and you can then sleep well at night.
And Louise, this trial plot, this AHDB trial plot, or these trial plots, this is in the north of the country. There is a suggestion that it is moving south.
Yeah, I mean, it was found at these northerly sites. You're absolutely right. I think it's down to around about South Lincolnshire now, so it's clearly on the move, and it has prompted everybody, agronomists, everybody, to think, oh, I need to get out there and have a good look. I think we also need to remember that there are some popular wheat varieties that are well known for getting yellow rust, but they're not the concern in the same way because, of course, they are classed as susceptible to the disease. They have very low ratings on the recommended list. So they are ones that we would have been looking out for anyway. They're the likes of Zayat and Skyfall. So that the difference here is that these are varieties that normally we would be very relaxed about at this time of year. They have good disease resistance, really no need for early sprays unless very exceptional circumstances. So we are going to have to just take a very good look at those because, of course, although it has been dry and sunny, we've had overnight dew, so everything stayed really in the disease's favour. Thank goodness we do have the service, the UK CPVS, because it's there to monitor these changes. That's exactly what it was set up for.
Another challenge then, Louise, for arable growers who are certainly feeling the pressure at the moment and just a week or so after they've been asked to reduce pesticide use.
Yeah, I know. And of course, that is the direction of travel. And as you said at the time, Johann, no one's going to go out spraying just for the sake of it, are they? I think one of the other points about this particular situation that we're finding is that the concern and the worry is that this is major gene resistance, which is being overcome. So this gene is known as YR15, and it really has almost made these varieties immune to yellow rust up until now. So that's the concern. We don't absolutely know that yet. As you rightly said, there is something geographic going on as well, which can happen with when you've got different races of a disease out there. So we will see. Just using a little bit though of tebuconazole at T0, it's not going to affect that pesticide reduction target too much.
And Louise, if someone does find something, presumably, where do they send it? What do they do with it? Do they phone their agronomist? Do they dial a hotline? How does it work?
Well, what they need to do, Hugh, is send a sample. So send some leaves, the ones that have got active yellow rust on them, send it in to UK CBVS. That's the UK Cereal Pathogen Virulence Survey, which is based at NIAB. And they have a free post service for that. So it's easily done. Make sure you put that in a paper envelope, not in a plastic bag, which will then affect what happens to it. So paper envelope, straight in the post. And, the more samples they get, the more sure they can be of what's going on out there, and then the right advice can be issued as and when they have the results.
Louise, thank you. On top of your game, as always, when it comes to everything that is going on in the arable world. Collect your yellow rust samples, put them in a paper envelope and send them off to CEPVS, and we'll put a link to CEPVS on the show notes page of this episode of the Farmers Weekly Podcast.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
And finally, a new report sets out ways campaigners believe farmers can supply more local food. Backed by a number of NGOs, including Sustain, the Food, Farming and Countryside Commission, Pasture for Life and the Sustainable Food Trust, the report says local food systems can help strengthen local economies and communities while increasing farm profitability and encouraging the uptake of nature-friendly farming. It's calling for the establishment of local food growth plans for each region in the UK. Louise, Hugh, some good recommendations in this report, and we'll put a link to it in the show notes page of this episode of the Farmers Weekly Podcast. But Hugh, is it really going to work?
I think you've got to try. I mean, it's hugely challenging because when you look at the proportion of food that's purchased that people consume that comes through what you might deem as the local food channel. So it might be through farm shops, farmers markets, box schemes, all that sort of stuff. It's still pretty tiny in the comparison to what people buy through the multiples, through catering, etc., etc. But I think unless you actually start to exemplify, if you can highlight areas where it does work economically for the grower and it's beneficial for the consumer because it's fresh, even if it costs them a little bit more. If you can do it on price parity, then great. But if you can highlight those unique areas where you can make it work, then it's got to be a good thing.
Louise, at a time when I think everybody's feeling the pinch, there's a cash crisis out there for many families, many consumers, local food has to be competitive. And that is difficult when you're competing against the big supermarkets, including discounters.
Well, you have to admire their ambition, don't you? But like you, whether it's cash rich, you need to be time rich, I think, as well, to be able to really investigate and enjoy local food supply. I'm sure it does work very well in certain circumstances and certain places, and I'm also absolutely convinced that it does get more money back down to the farm level, which is really, as we've already discussed, is what we need to do. But I think the everyday lives of people, buying your food for a whole family, if you're a family of 5 or whatever you are, you need to be able to do that in a way that suits with the rest of your lifestyle. And I think that is probably the biggest challenge that they're going to come across.
Hugh, Louise raises a good point. Not many examples. There are a few, yes, but not many examples where this works on the ground.
Yeah, it's hard to find there are lots of people that set up and do this, and they do it for a short period of time where they're doing box schemes, local supply. There's a whole variety of things. And you're right, there's not many that carry on. There are some, don't get me wrong, there will be some out there that are doing a phenomenal job and have been going plus 5 years, making good profits, reinvesting. There are loads of farm shops doing really well. But a lot of those, they're doing well, but it'll be the coffee shop that's helping. The food margin will be a lot less. The food retail margin will be a lot less than the coffee shop and the farm park type margin, which is a lot higher. I've done it with asparagus. I did it with 6 or 7 years with asparagus. I sold asparagus locally off a really small acreage. We only had about 3 or 4 acres. Actually, it worked well because you didn't have to pack it, just put it in a box. The prices I sold it for, we flatlined at an average price through the whole season. A couple of farm shops bought it. They loved the product. A few local kitchens bought it, loved the product. What killed me was I wasn't big enough. I needed to go up a level. There was a shortage of labour, and actually what was also killing me was the reduction in herbicides available, residual herbicides to kill things like blooming bindweed in asparagus beds, which is a whole other story. I've done meat boxes. They are really hard work. Meat boxes are hard work, and they are tight margin. So there are lots of challenges. And the other big challenge, of course, when we talk about meat, is processing. And where I am, south of the Thames, we're on life support in terms of local abattoirs at the moment. So that's a huge challenge, sorting out that processing and how that might work. And I think a lot of people over the years have talked about local food hubs and collectives and cooperatives, and it's lovely. And look, it does work in certain areas. Don't get me wrong. There are parts of the world when you go west where it is working, but it's on a very small scale and to a very small clientele. So if we could do it more and more people can make more money out of it and you get better food in your fridge, great. But there are some big challenges there. And good luck to these guys, though, trying to highlight where the opportunities are.
And one of the recommendations of this report, Hugh, a roadmap for meeting the commitment to public sector food procurement standards. Public sector procurement, one of the government's big drives when it comes to the future of food and farming.
Yeah, it is. And it's one that's been talked about loads and loads and loads over the years. The current administration have picked this one up. They want to run with it. And that's easier said than done, because when you're dealing with large organizations, you've got to have a whole change of culture. If you take schools, for example, school kitchens, run mainly by big catering concerns, big companies. Suddenly you say, oh, we're going to buy all the vegetables locally. Just imagine, whilst it's totally lovely and totally possible to do, is there the skill set in the kitchen to be able to handle different vegetables seasonally coming from within 20 miles? And is there the logistics and the grower preparation and planning and everything? Does it all work without having to rely on the general wholesale market to top up? It is possible to do, but it's not going to be easy. And, compared to what's happening at the moment, it's probably not going to be cheap. So there are serious challenges there.
And Hugh, talking about skill set, when you were busy with your asparagus and your meat boxes, what did you do about marketing? Did you do anything special, or was it word of mouth?
I danced naked around. No, I didn't, Louise. I just word of mouth, because I suppose no, I didn't do any dancing. The asparagus as a crop locally lends itself beautifully. Where I am in Surrey, next to a town, we've got 2 farm shops up the road. They both loved it, and they bought the lion's share of it. Some went into local kitchens. Once it was a bit, build it and they shall come. Once we took the punt and got rolling with it, it flew off the shelves, because it's a great product, and I could get it into the farm shop literally the same day or the next day, whereas the stuff they bought out of market in London might come from some fantastic colleagues up in East Anglia, for example, but it might take 3 days to get from the field to their farm shop through the market system. So from that point of view, it was a good product. It flew off the shelves. We did eggs for a while, lovely local eggs. Best eggs in the world. Everyone loved them. We sold them on the Fulham Road in London. We sold them locally in the farm shops. Made absolutely no money. Turned loads of money, but made no money, because we needed to get bigger. And to get bigger, probably the skill set we needed was thinking about how we raise more capital and how we employ more people. And there is a big conundrum in itself. You need the people. So the skill sets there's a multitude of skill sets needed. But in terms of the product, if the product's right, it sells. Where I think people also go wrong with local food is when they go, oh yeah, you've got to buy my local lamb box because it's local. Well, I couldn't give 2 monkeys, mate, where it's from. It's got to taste right. And if you buy it because you feel you have to, because it's produced locally for the first week, and you go, it's all right, but I could get the same thing down Waitrose or Tesco's for same or less money, why would you go back? And I know that sounds really harsh, but it is true. And anyone doing anything local food like that to set up, you've got to differentiate in the marketplace. So if you've got a good product, to be honest, it sells itself.
There we go. Forthright, as always, from Hugh. If you've got a good product, it'll sell itself. So if you're a salesperson out there, well, I don't know what you're doing. But Hugh, I think some people might take issue with what you just said. But anyway, look, that's about it for this episode of the Farmers Weekly podcast. Thank you for listening, wherever you're listening to us from. We'll be back next week with all the news and some more forthright views from Hugh Broom and indeed Louise Impey. Do join us wherever you get your podcasts, and if you really like what you hear, and indeed if you don't, please do leave us a review. Email us at podcast@fwi.co.uk, and if you're in the UK itself, you can message us by texting the word farm followed by your message to 88440. Until next week though, when we'll be back with another episode. I'm Johann.
I'm Louise Impey.
And I'm Hugh Broom.
Thank you for listening.